Before we get into it, if you've ever felt invisible at work, if you've ever been the one holding everything together while someone else took the credit, then you're going to understand this story. Do me a favor and hit that like button and let me know in the comments if you've ever had a boss who thought you were just part of the furniture. It helps to know I'm not the only one. My name is Adriana. For 5 years, I was the exclusive caterer for Vance, Sterling, and Dunn, one of the most powerful and ruthless law firms in the state. The partners there weren't just lawyers, they were kingmakers and career enders. And my boss, the man who hired me, was Arthur Vance himself, senior partner, a man who moved through the world like it was his personal boardroom, and everyone in it was on his payroll. For 5 years, I wasn't a business owner in his eyes. I was his personal servant with a fancy title. I ran Adriana's catering, but to him, I was just the girl who brought the canapes. I was background noise. I was furniture. And because I was furniture, I heard everything. The thing about powerful men is they believe their importance makes them soundproof. They think the little people are not only deaf but stupid, so they'd stand by my carefully arranged charcuterie boards, sipping my hand-selected Pinot Noir, and discuss things that would turn a lesser person's hair white. Case-fixing strategies. How to manage a witness who was getting cold feet. Which judge's discretion could be purchased, and for how much. They spoke in coded language, but I'm a quick study. 5 years of listening to them taught me their dialect of corruption. It all ended over something so small, so petty, it was almost laughable. Arthur's daughter, Brittany, was getting married. It was the social event of the season for the city's legal elite. And of course I was catering it. The contract was for 250 guests. A massive undertaking, but the kind of challenge I thrive on. The day before the wedding, Arthur called me into his office. Not the conference room where we usually met, but his inner sanctum. The one with the leather chairs that smelled like money and smugness. He didn't ask me to sit. He never did. He was looking over the final invoice, a small, unpleasant smile on his face. He said, "Adriana, we have a small discrepancy. I see you've billed me for the full 250. That's not going to work." I was confused. I said, "Arthur, that's the number we contracted for. All the supplies have been purchased, my staff is scheduled." He waved his hand dismissively, a gesture I had come to despise. It was a gesture that said, "Your logistics are boring and beneath me." He said, "Plans have changed. Brittany's fiancé, his family, they've had some people drop out. We're looking at closer to 175, maybe 180. So just adjust the invoice. Bill me for 175. We'll call it even." My blood ran cold. This wasn't a change of plans. This was a shakedown. The wedding was tomorrow. Every miniature quiche, every bacon-wrapped scallop, every single origin coffee bean was already paid for and sitting in my coolers. My staff had turned down other work to be there. He wasn't asking me to adjust for a new reality. He was asking me to eat the cost of his lie. He wanted to save $20, maybe $30,000, and he wanted my small business to pay for it. I stood there, feeling the familiar heat rise up my neck. The quiet, impotent anger I'd swallowed for 5 years. I said, "Arthur, with respect, that's not possible. The costs are incurred. The contract is for 250. His eyes, which were usually a flat, disinterested gray, sharpened into something hard and dangerous. He leaned back in his chair, a predator getting comfortable. He said, "Adriana, I think you're misunderstanding our relationship. I give you a tremendous amount of business. The exclusivity, the access, it has made you a very successful young woman. I am asking you, as a sign of our mutual goodwill, to be a team player. Adjust the invoice." He wanted me to lie, to falsify my own business records so he could stiff me. This was the man who lectured associates about ethics, who sat on the board of a legal ethics committee. The hypocrisy was so thick I could taste it, and in that moment something inside me didn't just break, it vaporized. It turned into a kind of cold, clear, diamond-hard resolve. All the little humiliations, all the times he'd snapped his fingers at me, all the times he'd called me sweetheart in front of his partners, All the stolen credit and the casual cruelty, it all coalesced into a single quiet thought. No. I looked him right in the eye. I kept my voice perfectly level. I said, "No, Arthur. I will be providing food and service for 250 guests, as per our signed contract. I will be billing you for 250 guests. If fewer people show up, that's unfortunate, but it doesn't change the terms of our agreement." The silence in that office was absolute. He stared at me as if I had suddenly grown a second head. He had never been told no by me, by anyone he considered to be the furniture. His face went from surprised, to confused, to a deep blotchy red. He stood up. He was a tall man, and he used his height to intimidate. He pointed a finger at my face. "You are finished," he hissed. "You are finished in this city. When I am done with you, you won't be able to cater a dog's birthday party. The contract is terminated. Get your things out of my building. You're fired." I didn't flinch. I just nodded. I said, "I understand. I'll send you the final invoice. It will include the full amount for the wedding per the cancellation clause in our contract." He was sputtering, speechless with rage. I turned and walked out of his office, my back straight, my heart pounding like a drum against my ribs. I walked past his secretary, who was staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. I walked through the halls of that firm, a place I had spent more time in than my own apartment for 5 years. And as I walked, I felt a strange, terrifying sense of calm, because Arthur had forgotten the most important thing about the furniture. The furniture is always there. The furniture always listens. And for the last year, ever since a particularly nasty incident where he'd accused me of shorting him on shrimp for a client party, I had started wearing a discreet audio recorder pinned to my uniform. I'd told my staff it was for quality assurance, to make sure we were capturing client feedback accurately. But that was only half the truth. The other half was for insurance. I had hours of audio. Hours of Arthur Vance and his partners discussing things that the State Bar Association would find very, very interesting. Crystal clear recordings of them strategizing on how to bury evidence, how to get a friendly judge assigned to their case, how to pressure a witness into changing their testimony. I had a year's worth of their arrogance and their criminality, all saved on a tiny little memory card tucked safely in my pocket. Arthur thought he was just firing his caterer. He had no idea he had just armed his biographer. He didn't know it, but the State Bar Association was about to receive a very interesting new podcast series, and I was going to narrate it myself. The walk from his office to the service elevator felt like a mile. Every face I passed, junior associates, paralegals, administrative staff, they all looked at me with a mixture of pity and fear. News traveled fast in a place like that. The gossip network was more efficient than their internal email. By the time I reached the loading dock, my phone was already buzzing. It was my sous chef Maria, asking what was going on. I told her I'd call her back. I couldn't speak. The shock was starting to wear off, replaced by a tremor in my hands that I couldn't control. I sat in my delivery van for what felt like an hour, parked in the concrete cavern of the firm's underground garage. The air smelled of cold exhaust and dampness. This was it. 5 years of my life, gone. 5 years of getting up at 4 in the morning to get the best produce from the market. 5 years of designing menus tailored to the specific tastes of visiting clients from Japan or Germany or Brazil. 5 years of remembering that Mr. Sterling preferred his coffee black but with 1 grain of raw sugar, or that Mr. Dunn was allergic to walnuts. I hadn't just provided a service. I had become a part of their operational infrastructure, a part they took so completely for granted that they had forgotten it was a separate entity, run by a living, breathing person. The anger hadn't hit yet. That would come later. Right now it was a hollow, crushing weight in my chest. I had built my entire business around this one client. The exclusivity clause Arthur was so proud of was in reality a golden cage. I had prestige, a steady income, a name that was recognized in certain circles, but I had no other clients, no diversification, no safety net. He hadn't just fired me, he had amputated my livelihood, and he had done it with the casual indifference of someone flicking a speck of dust off his suit. My mind started to race, spiraling into the dark abyss of panic. The lease on my commercial kitchen, the payroll for my 4 full-time employees, the contracts with my suppliers, the loan I had taken out to buy the new refrigerated van I was sitting in. It was all predicated on the income from Vance Sterling and Dunn. I had put all my eggs in one very expensive, very corrupt basket. And then the flashbacks started. Not of the good times, there had been some in the beginning, but of the 1,000 tiny cuts that had led to this moment. I remembered my first year, when I was still trying so hard to impress them. I'd catered a holiday party. I stayed up for 2 nights straight, hand-making over 1,000 intricate pastries. Arthur had walked past the dessert table, picked one up, taken a bite, and said to a client, loud enough for me to hear, "It's amazing what you can get from those frozen food wholesalers these days." He didn't even look at me. He just assumed I hadn't made them, that I had cheated. The credit went to some anonymous corporation, and the insult went straight to my heart. I remembered the time a major case they were working on was about to collapse. The key witness was refusing to cooperate. The entire firm was in a state of panic. I was setting up for a late-night emergency session in the main conference room. Arthur and another partner, a man named Michael Sterling, were there. They thought they were alone. They were standing by the coffee urn I had just filled. I was on the other side of a decorative screen, replacing a tray of sandwiches. I was invisible. I heard Sterling say, "We're sunk, Arthur. He's going to talk, and he's going to undo everything." Arthur's voice was low, like a snake's hiss. "He won't talk." I made a call to his brother-in-law, the one with that little construction business. I reminded him that his city permits were up for review next month, and I reminded him who sits on the review board. It's a delicate ecosystem. The brother-in-law will have a chat with our witness. The witness will suddenly feel a bout of profound loyalty. I had frozen behind the screen, my knuckles white on the edge of the silver tray. It was so blatant, so shamelessly corrupt. That was the day I started to truly understand what kind of men I was working for. It was also the day before I went online and bought the small high-fidelity audio recorder. It felt like an insane, paranoid thing to do. An overreaction. But something in my gut, some primal sense of self-preservation, told me to do it. I told myself it was for quality assurance, a way to protect myself from false accusations like the frozen pastry incident. But I knew deep down, I was building an arsenal. And then there was Elena. Elena was a paralegal, barely 25 years old, with a fire in her eyes and a mountain of student debt. She was smart, kind, and completely out of her depth in the shark tank of the firm. She reminded me of myself 5 years ago. We'd bonded over her love for my lemon tarts and her hatred for the firm's culture. She would often come down to the catering prep area I used on the 34th floor, supposedly to grab a coffee, but really to vent. She was one of the few people who saw me as a person. She'd tell me about the impossible hours, about the partners who treated the junior staff like their personal servants. Oh, the irony. She'd talk about cases, never with specifics that would violate privilege, but in general terms. She'd say things like, "It feels like we're not even trying to win on the facts anymore. It's all about who you know, who you can pressure." She was confirming the things I was hearing, giving context to the whispers I was recording. I remembered one afternoon, a few months ago, she came to me, her face pale. She was distraught. She told me she had been tasked with redacting documents for a big case. Her boss had told her to redact not just privileged information, but entire paragraphs of data that were damaging to their client. She knew it was wrong. It was evidence tampering, plain and simple. She had looked at me, her eyes full of tears, and whispered, "What do I do, Adriana? If I say something, my career is over. If I don't, I'm a part of it." I had felt a surge of protectiveness for her. I gave her a cup of tea and a fresh croissant. I told her, "You document everything. You keep a private log. You write down who told you to do it, and when. You create your own insurance policy. You have to protect yourself, because nobody else here will." She had looked at me, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. I was telling her to do for herself exactly what I was doing for myself. And now, sitting in my van in the cold, dark garage, I thought of her. I thought of her quiet integrity, and it was like a splash of cold water to the face. The despair, the hollow feeling in my chest, it didn't disappear, but something new began to form around it. A core of anger, a cold, hard, righteous fury. Arthur Vance hadn't just fired me. He had tried to make me compromise my own integrity for his petty greed. He had done it after years of benefiting from my hard work, my talent, and my discretion. He had pushed me, and people like Elena, into a corner where our only choices were to be complicit or to be destroyed. He thought he had destroyed me. He thought he had won. I finally took a deep breath. The tremor in my hand stopped. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small black metallic recorder. It was cool to the touch. I looked at it. This tiny little piece of technology. My insurance policy. My arsenal. No, this wasn't an arsenal. It was a foundation. I started the van. The engine turning over sounded unnaturally loud in the silence of the garage. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet. The podcast idea was still just a spark of vengeful fantasy. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was not the end. Arthur Vance had spent 5 years treating me like I was invisible. He was about to find out what the invisible woman could do when she finally decided to be seen. It wasn't about revenge. It was about balance. The scales had been tipped in his favor for far too long. It was time to put a thumb on the other side. My thumb. The first 48 hours were a blur of logistics and damage control. I had to call Maria, my sous chef and the closest thing I had to a partner. I had to tell her, and the rest of my small loyal team, that our primary source of income had vanished overnight. I saw the panic in their eyes, and it felt like a physical blow. These were good people. They had families. They had trusted me. I promised them I had a plan, even though that plan was still a chaotic storm of anger and half-formed ideas in my head. I told them I would pay them for the next month out of my own savings, no matter what. It wasn't about being a martyr. It was about loyalty, a concept that was completely alien to Arthur Vance. Then came the grim task of canceling the suppliers for the wedding. Some were understanding, others, less so. I lost deposits. I burned bridges that had taken me years to build. Every phone call was a fresh humiliation, a reminder of the power Arthur wielded even in his absence. His name was a sledgehammer, and he had just used it to shatter the foundations of my business. I spent most of those 2 days in my small apartment, a place that suddenly felt like a bunker. The silence was deafening. I'd toggle between my accounting software, staring at the terrifying numbers, and the folder on my laptop where I had been offloading the audio files for the past year. The folder was labeled QA
Client feedback.
It was my little inside joke. Inside there were hundreds of files, each one labeled with a date and a location. 2022 1015 underscore conference room 7, 2023 0122 underscore partners lounge, 2023 0304 underscore AV underscore office. The sheer volume was daunting. Over 100 hours of audio, a secret history of a corrupt empire, recorded in pristine high-fidelity sound. My first step was to listen. I bought the best noise-canceling headphones I could afford, and started at the beginning. I poured myself a glass of cheap whiskey and pressed play. Listening to it all again, chronologically, was a different experience than capturing it in the moment. In the moment I was focused on my work, catching only snippets. But now I could hear the whole tapestry, the casual malice, the bone-deep arrogance, the utter certainty that they were untouchable. I heard Arthur laughing with a rival lawyer about a case they had colluded on, agreeing to a settlement that screwed both of their clients, but guaranteed them a quick payday. I heard Michael Sterling coaching a junior associate on how to lose a document during discovery. It's not perjury if you can't find it, son. It's just poor record keeping. I heard them mock their clients behind their backs. I heard them make cruel misogynistic jokes about female judges. I heard them discuss their children's trust funds in one breath, and how to intimidate a witness in the next. It was a masterclass in moral rot. As I listened, I began to build a new kind of spreadsheet, not for finances, but for transgressions. I created columns: date, speaker, topic, potential illegality, and a column I called thematic resonance. I started tagging the files: bribery, witness tampering, obstruction of justice, fraud, conspiracy, The list grew longer and longer. This was no longer just about Arthur firing me over a catering bill. That was merely the spark that lit the fuse. The real crime was this entire system he had built, this culture of impunity that he nurtured and profited from. The subplot with Elena became a crucial thread in this process. I needed to understand the context of what I was hearing, the names of cases, the internal firm jargon. I couldn't just call her and ask, hey, what was the Project Nightingales they were talking about back in March? I had to be careful, so I crafted a text. I told her I was updating my client portfolio and was trying to remember the name of a specific dish I had served at a lunch meeting months ago. I invented a fake dish, the saffron risotto cakes. I asked if she remembered that meeting, the one about the Nightingale Pharma case. It was a long shot, a piece of social engineering I had no right to expect would work. But Elena, bless her heart, was helpful as always. She texted back a few hours later. Oh my God, the Nightingale disaster. I remember, we all lived on your amazing mini quiches for a week. Yeah, that was the big pharmaceutical whistleblower case. So messy. I can't believe we won that one. Bingo, Nightingale was the whistleblower case. I went back to the audio file from that week, and there it was, Arthur talking to one of his senior litigators. His voice was a low growl. The whistleblower has proof of the falsified trial data. We can't fight it on the merits, so we fight the man. I had our private investigator do a deep dive. He's got a gambling problem, a nasty one. We're going to leak it to that friendly reporter at the Chronicle. By the time he's done, the man's credibility will be so shot, nobody will care about his data. My stomach churned. They hadn't won the case. They had destroyed a man's life to cover up a corporation's crimes, a man who was trying to do the right thing. This was the moment the podcast idea solidified from a fantasy into a blueprint. This couldn't just be a data dump to the state bar. An anonymous envelope full of files could be dismissed, buried. It needed to be a story. It needed a narrative. It needed to be public. A bomb has no power until it detonates in the open. I started to outline it like I would a multi-course tasting menu. Each episode would have a theme, a beginning, a middle, and an end. Episode 1 would be the appetizer, something undeniable and unethical, but perhaps not blatantly illegal. I found the perfect clip, Arthur on the phone with a wealthy client, advising him on how to transfer assets into a series of offshore trusts to hide them from his wife in a divorce proceeding. He was laughing as he did it. The key, he said, is to make the paper trail so convoluted, so expensive to follow, that she'll just give up and take the first lowball offer. It was scummy. It was a clear violation of legal ethics, and it was the perfect introduction to the character of Arthur Vance. Episode 2 would be the main course, something with more teeth. The Nightingale case, the witness tampering. I would play the clip of Arthur plotting to destroy the whistleblower. I would let his own words paint the picture of his monstrous tactics. Episode 3, that would be the dessert, the showstopper. I had been saving it. It was a recording from just 2 months ago. Arthur was in his office with a real estate developer, a man whose name was always in the papers. They were celebrating a recent zoning variance that had made the developer hundreds of millions of dollars. The developer was thanking Arthur profusely. I don't know how you did it, Arthur. Judge Albright was a stone wall, and I could hear the clink of glasses. Arthur's voice was smooth, confident, and dripping with contempt. Every wall has a price, my friend. Judge Albright's just happens to be his son's tuition at Stanford Medical School. It's amazing how a generous, anonymous contribution to the university's scholarship fund can clarify a judge's thinking on complex zoning laws. Judicial bribery, the third rail of the legal profession, an unforgivable sin. It was the kill shot, and I had it, recorded in perfect damning clarity. But having the material and having a plan were two different things. I was a caterer, not a media producer. I spent the next week living on coffee and adrenaline, falling down a rabbit hole of YouTube tutorials, how to edit audio in Audacity, how to anonymously host a podcast, understanding RSS feeds. I bought a domain name, The Eagle's Nest. It was a play on the firm's logo, which featured a proud soaring eagle. The irony was delicious. I found a podcast host that accepted payment in cryptocurrency. I spent 2 days teaching myself how to buy Bitcoin, feeling like a spy in a cheap thriller. I reached out to my nephew Kevin.
He's a 19-year-old computer science major who thinks I'm hopelessly ancient. I told him a white lie. I said I was starting a passion project, a true crime podcast about corporate malfeasance, and I needed some technical advice on hiding my identity. He was thrilled. He thought it was cool. He walked me through setting up a VPN, using a Tor browser and scrubbing metadata from the audio files. He had no idea the corporate malfeasance was so close to home. His help was my firewall. Each night I would sit in the dark, my headphones on, snipping and editing the audio. It was a grim, painstaking process. I had to isolate their voices from the background noise, the clink of a coffee cup, the hum of the HVAC system. I became a connoisseur of their vocal tics. Arthur's pre-lie throat clearing, Sterling's wheezy laugh. I felt like a forensic scientist, dissecting a diseased corpse. This entire process, this deep dive into the belly of the beast, it changed me. The fear and panic of being fired were still there, but they had been baked into something harder, a cold, methodical resolve. I stopped thinking about my lost business, my lost income. I started thinking about the whistleblower, about the wife getting cheated in her divorce, about Elena trapped in that toxic system, about the unnamed, unseen victims of their greed. I realized my secret weapon wasn't just the recorder, it was my invisibility. For 5 years they had looked right through me. They had treated me as a non-entity. They never once considered that the caterer was listening, that the caterer was smart, that the caterer was smart, that the caterer had a conscience. My foresight in buying that recorder wasn't genius. It was an act of quiet desperation. But now that desperation was being forged into a weapon I was learning how to aim. It wasn't about revenge anymore. I kept telling myself that, over and over. It became a mantra. It wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. It was about dragging their secrets out of the hushed, leather-bound offices and into the light. Arthur Vance and his partners operated in the shadows. I was about to give them a spotlight they never wanted. The plan was ready. The stage was set. It was time for the first course to be served. The night before I launched the first episode, I barely slept. I kept rereading my plan, checking every technical detail, the anonymous email accounts I'd created, the list of recipients, the timing. This wasn't like planning a dinner service. There were no do-overs. Once I hit publish, the world would shift. My world and Arthur's.
My target list for the initial email was small and carefully curated. I couldn't just blanket the legal community. That would be too noisy, too easy to dismiss as a crank. I needed precision. I needed to plant the seeds in fertile ground. The list had 3 categories. First, the influencer. I chose a woman named Clara Ives, who ran a legal ethics blog called The Gavel Drops. She was a retired law professor, with a reputation for being fearless and a massive online following among lawyers and journalists. If she took the bait, she would provide the amplification. Second, the internal network. I sent it to the general, unmonitored inboxes of 5 junior associates at Vance, Sterling, and Dunn, including Elena. I knew they were unhappy. They were the foot soldiers who saw the ugliness up close. They would be my 5th column, spreading the link inside the firm's walls like a virus. Third, the wounded. I did some research. I found the name of the lawyer who had represented the wife in the divorce case I had on tape, a small solo practitioner. I sent the link to her. She deserved to know how her client had been cheated. I drafted a simple anonymous email. The subject line was just 2 words, Eagle's Nest. The body of the email was even simpler. The Walls Have Ears, Episode 1, The Marital Asset, followed by the link to the podcast. At exactly 9 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, I hit send, and then I waited. The silence was excruciating. For the first hour, nothing happened. I checked the podcast host's dashboard, a handful of downloads, probably just me, refreshing the page obsessively. Doubt began to creep in. Was this a mistake? Was it too subtle? Would anyone even care? Then, at 10:17 a.m., I got a text from Elena. It was a single line of panicked capital letters. "What is this?" I didn't reply. A few minutes later, another text. Adriana, people are freaking out. They're playing it in the break room. Is this you? I felt a jolt of adrenaline, a mixture of terror and triumph. It was working. The seed had sprouted. I went to Clara Ives's blog. Nothing. I checked her social media. Nothing. My heart sank a little. She was the linchpin. Without her, this might just remain an internal firm meltdown. I spent the next few hours pacing my apartment, feeling like a general in a war room with no intel from the front lines. Elena's texts were my only window into the chaos. Arthur just stormed through the office. He was screaming. He thinks it's a rival firm trying to poach the Henderson account. They've called an all-hands partners meeting. Mandatory. All junior staff have been told to clear the floor. It is sweeping everyone's computer. They're looking for who downloaded it first. I have to delete our texts. Be careful. Her last message sent a chill down my spine. This was real. The giant was stirring, and it was angry. Then at 2:43 p.m., it happened. My phone buzzed with a notification. Clara Ives had just posted on her blog. The headline was explosive. Exclusive leaked audio. Appears to show senior partner at Vance Sterling and Dunn advising client on hiding assets in divorce. My hands were shaking as I clicked the link. She had embedded the podcast episode directly into her post. She wrote, I have received an anonymous tip containing a link to a new podcast entitled The Eagle's Nest. The audio quality is exceptionally clear. In it, a voice identified as allegedly belonging to Arthur Vance, a titan of our city's legal community, can be heard giving what appears to be detailed instructions on committing what amounts to fraud on the court. While the source is unverified, the implications are staggering. The State Bar Association has been contacted for comment. This is a developing story. The floodgates opened. Within minutes, the link was everywhere. Legal news sites picked it up. Mainstream journalists started calling the firm. The comment section on Clara's blog exploded. Some were skeptical, but most were shocked. The sheer clarity of the audio was what made it so powerful. There was no ambiguity. It wasn't a he said, she said. It was just what he said. The panic inside the firm must have been biblical. Arthur's strategy of blaming a rival firm would have evaporated the moment Clara's post went live. The problem was no longer about a disgruntled client. It was about public humiliation. It was about the one thing men like Arthur fear more than anything, losing control of the narrative. I imagined him in that emergency partners meeting. The smug confidence gone, replaced by a desperate, cornered animal fury. His partners, men who were his friends and co-conspirators, would now be looking at him as a liability. Their loyalty, I knew, was only as deep as their profit-sharing agreement. By the end of the day, the firm had released a terse statement. Vance, Sterling, and Dunn is aware of a malicious and defamatory recording being circulated online. We believe this is a targeted attack on our firm and our reputation. We are taking this matter very seriously and have launched a full internal investigation to identify the source of this illegal recording. Illegal recording, that was their strategy. To attack the method, not the message. To paint me, the anonymous source, as the criminal. It was a classic lawyer's trick. When you can't argue the facts, argue the procedure. It might have even worked, except for one small detail I had researched during my late-night sessions. Our state was a one-party consent state for audio recordings. As long as one party in the conversation knew it was being recorded, and I was always in the room, a party to the ambient noise of the conversation, it was perfectly legal, a debatable point to be sure. The kind of plausible inaccuracy that would make lawyers argue for weeks. But I was confident it would hold up. They were playing checkers. I was playing chess. That evening I didn't feel triumphant. I felt a strange, detached calm. I had fired the first shot in a war I didn't know how to win. I had wounded the beast, but it was far from dead. It was now thrashing, angry, and looking for someone to blame. I thought about Arthur. I pictured him not in his office, but at home. In his perfect mansion, with his perfect family. The wedding he had tried to cheat me on was supposed to be this weekend. I wondered if it would still happen. I wondered if he could hear the foundations of his world cracking beneath his feet. I opened my laptop and went to the folder for episode 2, the Nightingale case. The witness tampering. The first shot was to get their attention. The second one was to cripple them. The first episode was about Arthur's lack of ethics. The second would be about his criminality. I wasn't just taking over the narrative. I was becoming it. The week between episode 1 and episode 2 was the longest of my life. The initial explosion of media attention died down into a tense, simmering standoff. The firm went into lockdown. They hired an external crisis management team and a forensic IT security firm. According to Elena's carefully worded, infrequent texts, the atmosphere inside was a toxic soup of paranoia and fear. Arthur Vance was on a witch hunt. He was convinced the leak came from a disgruntled associate he had recently passed over for promotion. He was tearing his own firm apart from the inside, looking for a traitor, never once suspecting the caterer he had so carelessly discarded. His fatal flaw was his arrogance. He couldn't conceive of a threat coming from someone he considered beneath him. His entire worldview was built on a hierarchy of power, and in his mind I was at the very bottom. This was my greatest protection. Meanwhile, I was living like a hermit. I didn't leave my apartment unless I absolutely had to. I paid for everything in cash. I imagined their high-priced investigators were already trying to trace the source of the podcast, looking for IP addresses, for digital fingerprints. My nephew Kevin's lessons in digital hygiene were my shield. I was a ghost in the machine. During that week, something unexpected happened. I got an email to the anonymous account I had set up. It was from the lawyer for the wronged wife, the one from episode 1. She wrote, "I don't know who you are, but thank you. We have filed a motion to reopen the discovery phase of my client's divorce settlement, citing new evidence of fraudulent concealment of assets. The recording you released is our Exhibit A. You have given my client a fighting chance." Reading that email was a turning point. It grounded me. This wasn't an abstract war against a faceless firm anymore. It had real-world consequences. Real people were being affected. The weight of that responsibility was immense, but it was also clarifying. It solidified my resolve. It wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. The phrase felt less like a mantra and more like a mission statement. On Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after the first drop, I published episode 2, The Nightingale Sings. This episode was different. It wasn't just a single conversation. I structured it like a piece of investigative journalism. I started with a brief text-on-screen summary of the Nightingale whistleblower case, using only publicly available information. Then I played the audio. The raw, unedited clip of Arthur Vance and Michael Sterling plotting to destroy the whistleblower by leaking his gambling addiction to the press. The impact was immediate and catastrophic. Clara Ives's blog post on this one was shorter, sharper, and far more brutal. The headline, "It's no longer about ethics, it's about crime." The State Bar Association, which had issued a tepid "We are monitoring the situation" statement after the first episode, now upgraded its response. They announced a formal investigation into Arthur Vance and Michael Sterling for professional misconduct, witness intimidation, and potential obstruction of justice. But the real blow came from a different direction. The Nightingale case had been a class action lawsuit against a massive pharmaceutical company, Omnipharm. Omnipharm was one of Vance, Sterling, and Dunn's biggest clients. They paid millions a year in legal fees. By noon, Omnipharm's general counsel had released a statement. Omnipharm is deeply disturbed by the contents of the recording released today. We were not aware of these alleged tactics. We have suspended our relationship with Vance, Sterling, and Dunn, effective immediately, pending the outcome of a full investigation. That was the sound of the first major crack in the dam. A client like Omnipharm leaving wasn't just a loss of revenue, it was a vote of no confidence that would echo through the entire corporate world. No corporation wants to be associated with a law firm that is publicly accused of witness tampering. The risk is too great. Elena's texts became more desperate. They just escorted Michael Sterling out of the building. His partners did it. They told him to take a leave of absence. An hour later, Arthur is locked in his office. He's been in there for hours. We can hear him shouting on the phone. The other senior partners are all in the main boardroom. It feels like a coup. And then came the move I had been half expecting, half dreading. My personal cell phone, the one I hadn't used for anything related to the podcast, rang. The caller ID was blocked. I stared at it, my heart hammering. I knew who it was. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a message appeared. It was from Arthur. His voice was completely different. The arrogance, the condescending tone, it was all gone. It was replaced by a strained, almost pleading sound. Adriana, it's Arthur Vance. Listen, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. I was under a lot of stress with the wedding. I may have been hasty. I'd like to talk. I want to make things right. Your contract with the firm, it's still yours. We can even increase the retainer. Just call me back, please. I listened to the message 3 times. The desperate counteroffer, the classic move of a man who has lost all power and has only money left to offer. He was trying to buy my silence. He still didn't know I was the one behind it all. He thought I was just a witness. He thought I was someone he could buy. He was still underestimating me. Even in his desperation, his condescension was baked in. He thought my loyalty, my integrity, had a price tag, and a surprisingly low one at that. I saved the voicemail. It was a beautiful piece of evidence, a testament to his character, or lack thereof. The exodus had begun. The power had shifted. He was no longer the predator. He was the prey, and his own partners were circling. He had made himself a liability, and in their world, liabilities are cut loose without sentiment. I did not call him back. I let him sit in his office, stewing in his panic. I let him wonder. I let him suffer the same uncertainty and fear that he had so casually inflicted on me and countless others. His attempt to counter was pathetic. He was offering me the very cage I had just escaped from, only with golden bars this time. He didn't understand that this was never about the money. It was about the principle. He was trying to put out a forest fire with a water pistol. I turned back to my laptop. It was time to prepare the final act. Episode 3, the one about Judge Albright and the Stanford tuition. This wasn't just about witness tampering or shady divorce tactics. This was about the core of the justice system. This was the bomb that would turn the rubble of his career into dust. The power had shifted, but the vindication was yet to come. The final days leading up to the release of Episode 3 were a strange mix of quiet tension and methodical preparation. The firm of Vance, Sterling and Dunn was in a death spiral. After Omnifarm pulled out, 2 other major corporate clients followed suit, citing concerns about the firm's ethical standing. The bleeding was public and severe. Michael Sterling's leave of absence became a permanent resignation, announced in a 3-sentence press release that reeked of panic. The ship was sinking, and the rats were scrambling for the lifeboats. Arthur was isolated. According to Elena, he was still coming into the office, but his partners were avoiding him. Meetings were happening without him. Decisions were being made around him. He was a ghost haunting the halls of the empire he had built. He was still a name on the door, but he no longer held any real power. The silent takeover was nearly complete. He tried to contact me again. 2 more voicemails, each more desperate than the last. He sent a fawning email to my business account, the one I had stopped checking, offering to personally finance a new, expanded kitchen for me. He was just throwing money at a problem he didn't understand. He thought he was dealing with a business dispute. He had no idea he was facing a moral reckoning. On the Monday before the final episode, I did something bold. I took the audio file of Arthur discussing the bribe for Judge Albright and sent it to a professional audio forensics lab I found online. I paid them a rush fee, again in cryptocurrency, to produce a certified report verifying that the recording had not been edited or tampered with in any way. It was an expensive gamble, but it was my checkmate move. I was preemptively dismantling his only remaining defense, the claim that the tapes were faked.
The night before the final release, I compiled everything into one last, devastating package. Episode 3, The Price of a Gavel. It was the shortest episode, but the most potent. Just the raw 30-second clip of Arthur and the developer talking about buying a judge's favor. No commentary, no explanation needed. The clip spoke for itself. I attached the certified forensics report as a downloadable PDF on the podcast page. Then I crafted the final anonymous email. This time the recipient list was much larger. I sent it to Clara Ives, of course, but I also sent it to the District Attorney's Office, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Judicial Conduct Commission, and every major news outlet in the state. At 9 a.m. on Tuesday, I hit send. The explosion was nuclear. Within an hour, the story wasn't just on legal blogs. It was the lead story on every local news channel. The phrase judicial bribery was a fire alarm that no one could ignore. Judge Albright immediately announced he was recusing himself from all active cases and taking a personal leave. The DA's office released a statement that they had opened a criminal investigation into both Arthur Vance and the judge. This was no longer a professional matter for the state bar. This was a felony. At around 11 a.m., my phone rang. It was Arthur. For some reason this time I answered. I don't know why. Maybe I just wanted to hear it. His voice was a choked, ragged whisper. You, he said, just that one word. It was filled with a dawning, horrified understanding. It was you. The whole time, the caterer. I remained silent. The line was thick with the static of his entire world collapsing. He started rambling, his voice cracking. Why? After everything I did for you, I gave you a career. I made you. Why would you do this to me? And in that moment, all my prepared lines, all the cutting remarks I had imagined delivering, they all melted away. They felt small and petty. He was a pathetic, broken man, and gloating felt beneath me. So I said the simplest, most honest thing I could think of. My voice was calm and steady. You fired me because I wouldn't lie for you, Arthur. You thought my integrity was worth less than the cost of a few plates of shrimp. You were wrong. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, a sharp, ragged gasp. Then I hung up. I blocked his number. That was the final confrontation. It wasn't in a boardroom. It wasn't a dramatic showdown. It was a quiet, two-sentence phone call that ended his reign. It felt right. Later that afternoon, Elena sent me a link to a news article. The remaining partners at Vance, Sterling and Dunn had voted unanimously to dissolve the firm. It was over. The name that had once inspired fear and awe was now a synonym for corruption and disgrace. They were firing him, in essence, by burning the entire building to the ground. The article mentioned that Arthur Vance had been escorted from the premises by building security. He had left with a single cardboard box of his personal effects. I thought about all the times I had seen him stride through those halls like a conquering hero. Now he was leaving like a disgraced temp. My new reality began to set in. The days of hiding in my apartment were over. The threat was gone. The overwhelming feeling wasn't joy or triumph. It was a profound, bone-deep sense of quiet. The noise was over. A week later, I took the money I had left in my savings, the money I had been prepared to lose completely, and I leased a small storefront in a quiet neighborhood across town. I hung a simple, elegant sign in the window. It just said, Adriana's. Not Adriana's Catering, just Adriana's. Maria and my team, who had been so loyal, so patient, came with me. We weren't a catering company anymore. We were a small cafe, a bistro. We served simple, honest food. The kind of food I loved to make before my menus became dictated by corporate expense accounts. Elena quit the dissolving firm and went back to school to get her law degree. She told me she wanted to be the kind of lawyer Arthur Vance could never be. She comes into the cafe for coffee sometimes. We never talk about the podcast. We don't have to. It's a silent understanding between us. The legal fallout for Arthur was immense. He was disbarred, of course. He pleaded guilty to the bribery charges to avoid a longer sentence, but he still served time. His name, once a symbol of power, was now a cautionary tale whispered in law schools. It was never about revenge. I know I keep saying that, and maybe you don't believe me, But it was about something more fundamental. It was about seeing a bully who believed he was above the rules and refusing to accept it. It was about the principle that no one, no matter how powerful, should be able to treat other people as if they are disposable. He built his world on a foundation of lies and intimidation. I just held up a mirror and let the world see the truth. The rest took care of itself. The vindication wasn't in his downfall. It was in my own quiet, peaceful new beginning. It was in the smell of fresh coffee in my own cafe, in the laughter of my staff, in the simple satisfaction of building something honest and true. I had my name back. And this time it was on my own terms. So here we are. It's been a year since all of this happened. My cafe is thriving. I'm exhausted, but it's the good kind of exhaustion. The kind that comes from building something that's yours. I don't have an exclusive contract with a high-powered firm anymore. I have a line of regulars out the door every Saturday morning. I'll take that trade any day. The story I just told you, it's about a law firm and a caterer. But it's not really about that. It's about what happens when you're underestimated. It's for anyone who has ever been made to feel small, invisible, or powerless in their job. It's a reminder that the skills you have, your attention to detail, your ability to listen, your quiet integrity, are not weaknesses. They are your greatest strengths. They are your hidden leverage. People like Arthur Vance, the arrogant bosses, the credit stealers, the bullies, they have a critical flaw. They never see the threat coming from the people they don't respect. They're always watching their rivals, their peers, their equals. They never ever look down. They never check on the furniture. So if you're in a situation where you feel unseen, remember this. You are not invisible. You are in camouflage. You are observing. You are learning. You are gathering information. Your power doesn't come from shouting. It comes from your knowledge, your competence, and your refusal to compromise who you are. Don't wait for them to recognize your value. Build your own table. Create your own space. Show them what you're worth on your own terms. The world is full of noise. The loud, blustering pronouncements of people who believe their volume equals their value. Your power is in your quiet, calculated action. Let them have the noise. You focus on the signal. You focus on the truth. Because in the end, the truth has a weight that no amount of bluster can overcome. It's the quietest voice in the room, but it's the only one that lasts. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, if you've ever felt like the invisible person in the room, do me a favor and hit that like button. Share this video with someone who might need to hear it. And please leave a comment below and tell me about a time you realized your quiet skills were actually your superpower. I read every single one, and it helps to know this story is part of a larger conversation. And of course, if you want to hear more stories about turning the tables and reclaiming your power, make sure you hit that subscribe button and the little bell so you don't miss what's next. Thank you for being here. You are seen.